Before we start, make sure to subscribe to our channel, The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. Chapter 1. In the first chapter of The Things We Leave Unfinished, we are introduced to Georgia Stanton, a woman whose life has essentially been razed to the ground. She's returning to her small Colorado hometown after a devastating divorce from a high-profile director in New York. The atmosphere is thick with a sense of defeat. Georgia isn't coming home as a conqueror, but as a survivor of a public and private collapse. She is staying at her late grandmother's house, which is a place filled with memories of Scarlett Stanton, a world-renowned romance novelist. The house itself acts as a sanctuary, but it is also a museum of Scarlett's legacy, which looms large over Georgia's own fractured identity. The narrative establishes that Georgia is currently at a crossroads, not just emotionally but legally. As the great-granddaughter of Scarlett, she has inherited the task of managing her grandmother's literary estate. This brings a specific kind of pressure, because Scarlett left behind one final unfinished manuscript, a story that her fans have been dying to read for decades. However, Georgia is protective and cynical, having just seen her own happily ever after dissolve into a mess of legal papers and betrayal. She is in no mood for the brand of idealistic romance her grandmother was famous for. She views romance through a lens of skepticism, believing that the endings people write in books rarely survive the reality of actual life. The tension shifts from internal to external when a man named Noah Harrison enters the picture. Noah is a massively successful author in his own right, known for his ability to write sweeping emotional epics. He has been scouted by the publisher to finish Scarlett's final book. When Georgia first meets him, the friction is immediate. To Georgia, Noah represents everything she is currently wary of. He is charming, confident, and he wants to put his own words into her grandmother's mouth. She sees his presence as an intrusion on a sacred family legacy, while he sees the unfinished manuscript as the ultimate professional challenge and a way to honor an author he deeply admires. The chapter spends a significant amount of time detailing the will they, won't they energy between Georgia and Noah. Even in their first antagonistic interaction, Noah is persistent and clearly has a deep respect for Scarlett's work, which bothers Georgia because she wants to find a reason to dismiss him. Their dialogue is sharp and loaded with subtext. Noah is trying to prove his worthiness to handle the manuscript, while Georgia is building walls to keep him, and the emotions the book might stir up at a distance. The power dynamic is interesting, because while Georgia holds the legal rights to the book, Noah holds the creative key to completing it. By the end of the chapter, the stakes are clearly defined. Georgia is forced to confront the reality that her grandmother's last wish was for this story to be told. Even if Georgia herself no longer believes in the magic of storytelling. The chapter closes with a sense of impending collision. Georgia is stuck between her desire to hide from the world and her responsibility to Scarlett's fans, all while dealing with the arrival of a man who seems determined to crack the shell she has built around herself. It sets the stage for a dual timeline narrative, suggesting that the unfinished story of the past is about to mirror the complicated, unfolding story of Georgia's present. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 2. In Chapter 2, the focus shifts toward the logistical and emotional tug-of-war between Georgia and Noah as they begin to navigate their forced partnership. After the initial shock situation settles in. Georgia is still very much in a defensive crouch, feeling protective of her grandmother's legacy and her own privacy. Noah, on the other hand, is eager to get to work, his professional ambition fueled by a genuine, almost obsessive admiration for Scarlett Stanton's writing style. The chapter is characterized by a clash of worlds as Noah's polished, successful author persona grates against George's raw, post-divorce cynicism. The narrative dives deeper into the specific terms of their arrangement. Georgia is not just a passive observer, she is the gatekeeper. She makes it clear to Noah that she will not simply hand over the manuscript and let him run wild with it. She demands a level of control that frustrates him, insisting on reviewing every chapter he writes to ensure it maintains Scarlett's authentic voice. This creates an immediate power struggle. Noah is used to being the star, the one whose name sells millions of copies. But in this house and with this project, he is merely a ghostwriter trying to earn the approval of a woman who currently despises the very idea of romance. A significant part of the chapter is spent in Scarlett's study, which serves as the primary setting for their conflict. Being in the room where Scarlett wrote her most famous works is a heavy experience for both characters. For Noah, it is like being in a cathedral of literature, and he treats the space with a reverence that Georgia finds both touching and annoying. For Georgia, the room is a reminder of a woman who believed in great loves, a concept that feels like a cruel joke to Georgia now. The physical closeness of working in the small book-lined room starts to break down some of the formal barriers between them, leading to a few moments of accidental vulnerability. The dialogue in this chapter is particularly sharp. Noah tries to push Georgia to open up about why she is so very resistant to finishing the book, but she deflects with sarcasm and coldness. He begins to realize that her hostility isn't really about him. It's about the fact that she has lost her faith in the happy endings he makes a living writing. There is a specific exchange where Noah argues that the ending of a story is the most important part because it gives the rest of the journey meaning, while Georgia counters that the endings are where everything falls apart. This ideological divide sets the stage for their future relationship, as Noah unknowingly takes on the task of trying to prove her wrong. As the chapter concludes, they reach a tentative, somewhat frosty agreement. Noah will stay in town to work on the book, and Georgia will provide him with the journals and letters Scarlett left behind to help him piecing together the unfinished plot. The mention of these letters is crucial, as it hints at the dual timeline structure of the novel. Just as Georgia gives Noah the first batch of Scarlett's private correspondence, the reader gets the sense that the things left unfinished aren't just in the manuscript, but in Scarlett's actual life. The chapter ends with Georgia alone, looking at the same letters she just gave to Noah, wondering if she is making a mistake by letting a stranger into the most private corners of her family's history. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 3. In Chapter 3, the narrative structure expands as we are introduced to the secondary historical timeline that runs parallel to Georgia's present-day struggle. The chapter begins with the transition into the past, specifically 1940, through the letters and journals Georgia has shared with Noah. The shift in time takes us to England during the early years of World War II, introducing us to a younger version of Scarlett Stanton. The atmosphere here is vastly different from the quiet, snowy Colorado town of the present. It is a world defined by the constant, low-thrumming anxiety of air raids, blackout curtains, and the sense that every goodbye could be the final one. The historical portion of the chapter introduces the young Scarlet as a woman of immense spirit and hidden depth. She is living in a country under siege, and the prose captures the gritty reality of wartime Britain. The smell of smoke, the rationing of food, and the way people try to maintain a sense of normalcy in the face of impending disaster. This is where we meet Jameson Stanton, the man who will become the central figure in Scarlett's great tragic romance. Their initial meeting is framed with the classic Yarros intensity, emphasizing an immediate, soul-deep connection that feels both beautiful and dangerous given the circumstances of the war. Scarlett is portrayed not just as a romantic lead, but as a woman navigating the complexities of duty and desire in a world that is literally falling apart around her. Back in the present day, the chapter shows the effect these letters have on Noah and Georgia. As Noah begins to read Scarlett's raw, personal accounts of her time in England, he becomes even more captivated by the woman behind the legend. He starts to see the parallels between the historical Scarlett and the modern-day Georgia, realizing that the cynicism Georgia displays is a direct result of the high standard for love set by her ancestors. Noah's immersion in the letters starts to change his approach to the project. He is no longer just a writer trying to hit a deadline, but a researcher trying to uncover a mystery that has been buried for over 70 years. The interaction between Georgia and Noah in this chapter moves from purely professional towards something more personal and inquisitive. Georgia watches Noah react to her grandmother's words, and it softens her stance slightly. Seeing his genuine emotional response to the letters makes it harder for her to maintain her hired gun view of him. They have a significant conversation about the nature of historical memory and how much of a person is lost when their stories are left unfinished. Georgia admits that she hasn't read many of these letters herself, as the pain of her grandmother's passing was too fresh, and the failure of her own marriage made the letters feel like an indictment of her own inability to find a lasting love. The chapter concludes with a lingering sense of mystery regarding the unfinished nature of the manuscript. As Noah reads deeper into the 1940s timeline, he begins to suspect that there is a discrepancy between the public version of Scarlett's life and what is written in her private journals. There are hints of a secret that Scarlett kept until her death, a piece of the story that wasn't just omitted for dramatic effect, but hidden for protection. This realization acts both the reader and Noah, creating a sense of urgency to solve the puzzle. The chapter ends with the two timelines beginning to braid together, as Georgia and Noah realize that to finish the book, they're going to have to dig up secrets that might be better left buried. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 4. In Chapter 4, the narrative continues to weave the two timelines together, deepening the emotional connection between the characters in both the past and the present. The atmosphere in the modern-day Colorado setting begins to shift ever so slightly from pure hostility to a reluctant, shared fascination with the history they are uncovering. Georgia and Noah are spending more time together in the confined space of the study, and the proximity is starting to have an effect. The friction between them is still the strong opinions are forced to collaborate on something deeply intimate. The present-day portion of the chapter focuses on the vulnerability that comes with sharing family secrets. Georgia watches Noah as he pores over her grandmother's private writings. She feels a strange sense of exposure. It is one thing to let the world read Scarlett's polished novels, but it is another thing entirely to let a stranger, especially a man as observant as Noah, into the raw, unedited thoughts of the woman who raised her. Noah, for his part, is starting to see past George's defensive shell. He notices the small ways she reacts to the mentions of Jameson in the letters, and he realizes that George's grief isn't just about her grandmother's death, but about the loss of the idealism her grandmother represented. They have a moment of quiet connection where the barriers drop for just a second, reminding Georgia that Noah isn't just a writer. He is a human being who is also capable of being moved by the power of a real story. The historical timeline in this chapter takes a significant leap forward in intensity. We return to 1940s England, where the relationship between Scarlett and Jameson is blossoming against a backdrop of increasing danger. The war is no longer a distant threat. It is a constant physical presence. The narrative describes the exhaustion of the Blitz and the way the uncertainty of tomorrow makes every moment in the present feel electric. Scarlett and Jameson's romance is portrayed as a desperate rebellion against the chaos around them. There is a sense of borrowed time that defines their interactions. They aren't just falling in love, they are clinging to each other as the world burns. Jameson's character is further developed as a man of duty, who is nonetheless haunted by the things he has seen and the things he might have to do. A major theme in this chapter is the idea of the public versus private self. In the past, Scarlett is beginning to realize that the letters she writes to Jameson are the only places where she can be her true self, away from the expectations of her family and the pressures of the war. In the present, Noah points out this exact quality in Scarlett's writing to Georgia. He notes that the fictional romance Scarlett eventually became famous for was likely a watered-down version of the visceral, messy reality she lived with Jameson. This conversation strikes a chord with Georgia, who is struggling with her own public image following her high-profile divorce. She starts to wonder if she ever really knew her grandmother at all, or if Scarlett was just as good at hiding behind a mask as Georgia is. The chapter concludes with a lingering question that starts to haunt both timelines. As Noah reads more of the journals, he discovers a series of entries that don't quite align with the established history of Scarlett's life. There are mentions of a specific event or a person that seems to have been erased from the official record. This mystery provides a new layer of tension to the story. It isn't just about finishing a book anymore. It is about a detective mission to find the truth. The chapter ends with Georgia and Noah looking at a photograph of a young Scarlett in England, both of them realizing that the happily ever after everyone believes in might be a cover for a much more complicated and potentially tragic reality. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 5. In Chapter 5, the narrative deepens the investigative nature of the present-day plot, while escalating the emotional stakes of the 1940s timeline. The atmosphere in Colorado is beginning to change as the winter air turns sharper, mirroring the cold realizations Georgia is starting to face regarding her family's past. The chapter is marked by a significant shift in the relationship between Georgia and Noah. just two people arguing over a manuscript, but are now becoming partners in a mystery that seems to grow more complex with every page they turn. The present-day sequence involves Georgia and Noah diving into a specific set of journals that Scarlett had kept under a different level of privacy than her usual writings. As they work together in the study, the physical tension between them becomes harder to ignore. Noah's insight into the narrative structure of Scarlett's life starts to impress Georgia, even if she is loath to admit it. He points out a recurring name in the journals, a name that has never appeared in any of Scarlett's published biographies or her famous novels. This discovery prompts them to look beyond the house and start researching local and military records from the 1940s. Georgia feels a mix of excitement and a strange, protective dread. She realizes that uncovering the truth might mean dismantling the very legend that has sustained her family's reputation for decades. The historical timeline in this chapter takes us back to a pivotal moment for Scarlett and Jameson in wartime England. The romance that felt so invincible in the previous chapter hits its first major grounded obstacle. Jameson receives orders that will take him away from the relative safety of their current location and into the heart of the conflict. The reality of the war, which they had tried to keep at bay with their private moments, finally crashes through their defenses. This section of the chapter captures the agonizing weight and the frantic need to memorize every detail of the person you love when you don't know if you will ever see them again. Scarlett's internal monologue reveals a woman who is beginning to understand the true cost of the great love she would later spend her life writing about. It isn't just about passion. It is about the endurance of spirit required to survive the silence when the letters stop coming. A central theme of the chapter is the concept of the hidden story. Noah argues that every great writer has a secret they never put on the page, a core truth that is too painful to share with a general audience. He suggests to Georgia that her grandmother's unfinished manuscript was unfinished because Scarlett couldn't figure out how to tell the truth without breaking her own heart. This theory hits Georgia hard as she reflects on her own life and the things she left unsaid during the demise of her marriage. She begins to see Noah not as an intruder, but as a mirror, reflecting her own fears and her own capacity for a deeper connection. The friction between them is now fueled by an intellectual and emotional intimacy that neither of them was prepared for when this project began. The chapter concludes with a haunting discovery in the present. While digging through a box of old correspondence that had been tucked away in the back of a closet, Georgia finds a letter that was never sent. It is addressed to Jameson, but the date on it is from long after the war ended, a time when the world believed their story had already reached its conclusion. This revelation throws everything Georgia thought she knew about her great-grandparents into question. The chapter ends with Georgia and Noah standing over the letter in the dim light of the study, the silence between them heavy with the realization that the unfinished part of the story might be much larger and more scandalous than they ever imagined. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. Chapter 6. In Chapter 6, the discovery of the unsent letter from the previous chapter acts as a catalyst for a major shift in both timelines. The atmosphere in the present-day Colorado house is thick with a new kind of intensity. Georgia and Noah are no longer just looking for a way to finish a book. They are now actively deconstructing a family myth. The realization that Scarlett was writing to Jameson long after the war, at a time when the world believed their story was over, suggests that the ever after Georgia grew up believing in was a carefully constructed facade. This discovery creates a bridge of shared curiosity between Georgia and Noah that finally starts to erode the walls of Georgia's cynicism. In the present, the chapter explores the growing chemistry between the two leads as they spend a long night theorizing over the mystery. Noah's professional intuition as a writer becomes an invaluable asset here. He begins to piece together the narrative gaps, suggesting that the unfinished manuscript wasn't a result of writer's block, but a result of Scarlett being unable to reconcile the truth of her past with the romantic expectations of her audience. Georgia finds herself opening up to Noah in a way she hasn't with anyone since her divorce. She admits that her grandmother's perfect love story was the benchmark she used to measure her own failed marriage, and seeing the cracks in that story makes her feel both terrified and strangely liberated. The intellectual partnership between her and Noah is officially starting to bleed into something more personal. The historical timeline in this chapter takes a dramatic and darker turn as we follow Scarlett and Jameson in 1941. The war has escalated, and the romantic bubble they lived in has been completely punctured by the harsh realities of Jameson's military service. It is revealed that Jameson's role is far more dangerous than Scarlett initially understood. He isn't just a soldier. He is involved in a high-stakes secretive mission that requires him to operate under a shroud of deception. This revelation adds a layer of spy thriller tension to the historical romance. Scarlett is forced to grapple with the fact that the man she loves is a stranger in many ways, bound by oaths and secrets that he cannot share even with her. The emotional core of the historical section focuses on the concept of the sacrifice. Jameson struggles with the weight of his mission versus his desire to protect Scarlett from the truth. He realizes that his involvement in the secret mission makes him a target and, by extension, puts Scarlett in danger. The prose captures the heartbreaking stoicism of the era, where duty to the country often meant the slow destruction of one's personal life. Scarlett, however, is not a passive character. She begins to use her own wits to figure out what Jameson is hiding, showing the same tenacity and intelligence that Georgia displays in the present. This reinforces the theme of the Stanton women being much tougher than the romance novelist label suggests. The chapter concludes with a shocking discovery in the journals that links the two timelines in a very physical way. As Noah and Georgia compare the unsent letter to the 1941 entries, they find a recurring symbol or code that Scarlett used, a hidden language that only she and Jameson shared. This discovery suggests that the manuscript itself might be written in a way that hides a final message. The chapter ends with Georgia and Noah realizing that the unfinished book is actually a map. They are no longer just completing a novel. They are following a trail of breadcrumbs left by a woman who wanted the truth to be found, but only by someone who is willing to look past the fiction. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 7. In Chapter 7, the narrative momentum shifts as the search for the hidden meaning behind Scarlett's writing moves from theoretical discussion into physical action. The atmosphere in the present day is charged with a restless energy as Georgia and Noah realize that the answers they seek are not just in the words on the page, but in the physical artifacts Scarlett left behind. This chapter marks a significant turning point in their relationship. The shared goal of solving the mystery has created a sense of us against the world that begins to override Georgia's lingering doubts about Noah's intentions. present-day sequence follows Georgia and Noah as they decide to leave the confines of the study to track down a specific lead. Their investigation into the hidden symbols and codes in the manuscript leads them to realize that Scarlet might have hidden more clues in a location outside the house, specifically a place that held sentimental value to her and Jameson. During this journey, the two characters are forced into closer proximity, and the conversation turns more intimate. Noah begins to share details about his own life and why he is so driven to find the truth in stories. He confesses that he has always felt like an outsider looking in, and Scarlet's work gave him a sense of belonging. This vulnerability makes Georgia see him in a new light. He isn't just a successful author looking for his next hit, but someone who is genuinely searching for a connection to something real. The historical timeline in this chapter is devastating, as it portrays the first major casualty of the war within Scarlet's immediate circle. The setting returns to 1941, where the Blitz is at its peak. The sense of constant looming death becomes a literal reality when an air raid strikes close to home. Scarlet is forced to face the brutal randomness of the war, the way it takes lives without warning or reason. This loss is a turning point for her character. The youthful optimism she once held is replaced by a cold, hard determination to survive and to protect the secrets Jameson has entrusted to her. The prose captures the sensory details of the aftermath, the dust, the silence after the sirens, and the hollow ache of seeing a familiar place reduced to rubble. The emotional weight of the past begins to mirror the emotional unfolding of the present. As Georgia learns about the trauma her grandmother endured, she starts to understand why Scarlet was so protective of her happily ever afters in her public writing. It wasn't because Scarlet was naive. It was because she knew exactly how much it cost to keep hope alive when everything is being destroyed. Georgia reflects on her own rubble, her divorce, and her lost sense of self, and finds a strange comfort in her grandmother's resilience. She realizes that she has been using her cynicism as a shield, but Scarlet used her stories as a weapon against despair. The chapter concludes with a significant discovery at the new location. Georgia and Noah find an object or a piece of correspondence that confirms the existence of Jameson's secret mission, but it also reveals a terrifying complication. It suggests that the mission didn't just end with the war, but had consequences that followed Scarlet for the rest of her life. The chapter ends with a sense of high-stakes suspense. They have found a piece of the puzzle, but it's a piece that suggests that danger might not be entirely in the past. The final scene shows Georgia and Noah looking at each other in the dim light, both aware that they have crossed a line from which there is no easy return. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 8. In Chapter 8, the investigation into Scarlet's past moves from the dusty pages of journals into the real world, as Georgia and Noah track down a living link to the history they are trying to uncover. The atmosphere of the present-day Colorado winter is juxtaposed with the heat of the growing connection between the two leads. They are no longer just colleagues. They are becoming confidants. This chapter emphasizes that while stories can be written down, the truth often lives in the memories of those who survived the events, and those memories are often far more complicated than any published biography suggests. The present-day sequence follows Georgia and Noah as they travel to meet an elderly contact who knew Scarlet during her time in England. This meeting is a high-stakes moment for as she is terrified of what she might hear. The contact reveals that Scarlett was much more than a witness to the war. She was a woman who lived in the shadows of Jameson's secret work. The conversation suggests that Scarlett's romance writer persona was the perfect cover for someone who knew too much about the darker side of the military intelligence world. For Noah, this adds a layer of literary thriller to the project, but for Georgia, it feels like her grandmother's entire life was a performance. During the drive back, Georgia and Noah have their most honest conversation yet, where Noah admits that he finds Georgia's strength more compelling than any fictional character he has ever created. The historical timeline in this chapter is filled with high-tension suspense. We return to 1941, where Jameson's secret mission has reached a critical and dangerous point. Scarlett, realizing that Jameson is being pushed to his limit, decides to take a massive risk to help him. She isn't content to just sit by the radio and wait. She uses her position and her social access to gather information that Jameson needs but cannot get himself. This marks a major evolution for Scarlett's character. She is no longer just the woman Jameson is fighting for, but a partner in the fight itself. The prose vividly describes the terrifying adrenaline of a civilian operating in a world of soldiers and spies, where a single misplaced word could lead to a treason charge or worse. The emotional core of the historical section focuses on the price of silence. Scarlett and Jameson have a brief, stolen moment together, where they realize that the secrets they are keeping are starting to change them. They can no longer talk to each other with the total honesty they once had, because the war has built walls of need-to-know information between them. This mirrors the present day, where Georgia is struggling to be honest with Noah about how much she is starting to care for him. Both women across time are grappling with the fear that being vulnerable and telling the truth might lead to their undoing. The chapter concludes with a shocking revelation in the present day. The contact gives Georgia a small locked box that Scarlett had left in their care decades ago, with instructions that it only be opened by her descendant when the time was right. When Georgia and Noah finally get the box open back at the study, they don't find a letter or a diary. They find a series of photographs and a set of military dog tags that don't belong to Jameson. The chapter ends with a chilling cliffhanger as Georgia realizes that the man her grandmother loved may not have been the man the world thinks he was. This discovery turns the unfinished manuscript into a potential confession, leaving Georgia and Noah staring at the evidence of a lifelong deception. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 9. In Chapter 9, the discovery of the dog tags from the previous chapter sends the present-day investigation into a tailspin. The atmosphere in the study is no longer just one of academic curiosity. It has become heavy with the weight of a potential scandal that could redefine Scarlett Stanton's entire life. Georgia is reeling from the possibility that the man who was her great-grandfather, the hero of the world's most beloved romance, might have been an entirely different person than the public record suggests. This chapter highlights the fragile nature of family legacy and the terrifying realization that even the people we love most can be strangers to us. In the present, Noah uses his research skills to track the serial number on the dog tags. This sequence is filled with a restless, late-night energy as they sit hunched over laptops. The blue light research leads to a breakthrough. The dog tags belong to a man who is officially reported as missing in action during a specific operation in 1941. However, the name on the tags is not Jameson Stanton. This creates a massive fracture in the narrative Georgia has lived her whole life. She begins to question if Jameson was an alias, or if her grandmother's great love was actually a complex cover story for something much more dangerous. The physical tension between Georgia and Noah reaches a boiling point during this high-stakes moment. The adrenaline of the discovery breaks down the last of Georgia's walls, and they share a moment of intense, raw connection that is no longer just about the book. The historical timeline in this chapter is equally explosive. We return to 1941, where Scarlett and Jameson are forced to face a devastating betrayal from within their own circle. Jameson's secret mission has been compromised, and it becomes clear that someone they trusted has been leaking information to the enemy. The sense of paranoia is palpable. Scarlett realizes that the safe world she tried to build is full of shadows. This chapter shows a darker side of the war, where the lines between hero and villain are blurred by the necessity of survival. Jameson is forced to make a choice that will haunt him for the rest of his life, and Scarlett is the only one who witnesses the true cost of his decision. The emotional core of the historical section focuses on the loss of innocence. Scarlett sees Jameson do something in the name of the mission that is cold and calculated, and it shatters her idealized image of him. She realizes that the war has turned the man she loves into someone she barely recognizes. However, instead of pulling away, she leans in, realizing that her love is the only thing keeping him tethered to his humanity. This mirrors the present day, where Noah is the only person seeing Georgia's true messy self. He doesn't judge her for her cynicism or her family's secrets. He simply stands by her as she navigates the wreckage of her history. The chapter concludes with a haunting scene in the past that explains the origin of the dog tags. Following the betrayal and a narrow escape, Jameson is forced to assume a new identity to survive and continue his work. Scarlett is the one who helps him bury his old self, a process that involves a literal and metaphorical death. The chapter ends in the present, with Georgia and Noah finding a corresponding entry in the unfinished manuscript, a passage that was previously incomprehensible, but now reads as a clear, coded admission of Jameson's true identity. They realize that Scarlett wasn't just writing a story. She was writing a map for the one person she hoped would eventually understand the truth. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. Chapter 10. In Chapter 10, the stakes reach a fever pitch as both timelines face an external threat that could silence the truth forever. The atmosphere of the present-day Colorado winter shifts from a quiet research retreat to a high-pressure corporate battlefield. Georgia and Noah have just barely begun to wrap their heads around the secret of the dog tags and Jameson's hidden identity. When the real world crashes back into their sanctuary, the chapter explores the theme of ownership, specifically who has the right to tell a story and what happens when that story is worth a fortune. The present-day sequence begins with the sudden and unwelcome arrival of Georgia's mother. Her presence is a jarring intrusion on the intimacy that has been building between Georgia and Noah. It is immediately clear that her visit is not motivated by maternal concern, but by the financial and reputational implications of Scarlett's estate. She is the embodiment of the Stanton family legacy as a brand, and she is horrified by the direction the research is taking. when she discovers that Georgia and Noah are digging into secrets that contradict the official version of Scarlett's life. She threatens to shut down the entire project and fire Noah. This creates a massive conflict for Georgia. She must decide whether to remain the loyal, good daughter who protects the family business, or to follow the truth she has discovered with Noah. For the first time, Georgia stands her ground, realizing that protecting a lie is what ruined her own life, and she refuses to let it happen to her grandmother's memory. The historical timeline in this chapter is a heart-pounding sequence of flight and survival. Following the betrayal in Chapter 9, Scarlett and Jameson are officially on the run in 1941 England. They are no longer just avoiding the enemy. They are avoiding the very people they once served, as the lines of loyalty have been blurred by the mission's compromise. The prose describes a harrowing journey through the English countryside during a blackout, where every shadow is a potential threat. This section highlights Scarlett's incredible courage. She is no longer the woman being protected, but the one navigating their escape. Jameson is physically and mentally exhausted, and it is Scarlett's sheer will that keeps them moving toward a safe house. The danger they face is visceral and immediate, emphasizing that their love wasn't just a romantic ideal. It was a survival bond. The emotional core of the chapter focuses on the price of the truth. In the past, Scarlett realizes that by staying with Jameson, she is effectively erasing her old life. She is choosing a path of obscurity and danger over the comfort of her social standing. In the present, Noah and Georgia have a private, intense conversation after Georgia's mother leaves. Noah offers to walk away if it saves Georgia's relationship with her family, but Georgia realizes that Noah is the only person who truly sees her. Their bond is cemented not just by the mystery they are solving, but by their shared refusal to be controlled by the expectations of others. The physical chemistry between them finally boils over, providing a moment of heat and connection amidst the cold pressure of the circumstances. The chapter concludes with a significant discovery at the end of the 1941 timeline. Scarlett and Jameson reach a temporary refuge, but they find a letter waiting for them that reveals the betrayal went much deeper than they thought. It involves a high-ranking official who is still part of the legend in the present day. Back in Colorado, Georgia and Noah find a matching piece of evidence in the manuscript that names this individual. The chapter ends with a chilling realization. The unfinished part of the story wasn't just a romance. It was a whistle blow. They aren't just writing a book. They are holding a confession that could ruin powerful people who are still alive. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 11. In Chapter 11, the story moves into a phase of deep personal revelation and high-stakes historical drama. The atmosphere in the present day is fraught with the aftermath of Georgia's confrontation with her mother. The sanctuary of the Colorado house feels compromised, and the pressure to either bury the truth or expose it is reaching a breaking point. This chapter is defined by the shattering of trust and the realization that the past and present are linked by more than just a manuscript. They are linked by blood and hidden agendas. The present-day narrative begins with Georgia and Noah attempting to process the implications of the whistleblower evidence they find. However, the intellectual mystery is suddenly eclipsed by a personal bombshell. While going through the final legal documents and research files that Noah brought with him, Georgia discovers a connection she never saw coming. ancestral link to the very people mentioned in Scarlett's secret journals, specifically the high-ranking official who was involved in the 1941 betrayal. This discovery hits Georgia like a physical blow. She feels a familiar wave of betrayal, wondering if Noah has been using her to get close to the evidence in order to protect his own family's reputation, or to settle an old score. The fragile intimacy they built is instantly replaced by a cold, sharp wall of suspicion. The historical timeline in this chapter takes us to a clandestine and high-tension meeting in London during the winter of 1941. Scarlett and Jameson have emerged from hiding to meet with a contact they believe can help them clear Jameson's name and expose the mole within the intelligence network. The setting is a bombed-out basement lit only by a few candles, creating a sense of claustrophobia and impending doom. During this meeting, the true scope of the conspiracy is laid bare. It is revealed that the mission Jameson was on was never meant to succeed. It was intended to be a sacrificial lamb to cover up a massive financial and political scandal involving both British and German interests. Scarlett watches as Jameson realizes that the country he loves has betrayed him for the sake of a few powerful men's bank accounts. This moment marks the definitive end of Scarlett's innocence and the beginning of her lifelong commitment to keeping the truth hidden until the world was ready to hear it. The emotional core of the chapter focuses on the concept of the inheritance of guilt. In the past, Jameson is crushed by the realization that his service meant nothing to the men in power. In the present, Georgia confronts Noah with the truth of his identity. Noah is forced to admit that he knew about the connection, but he insists that his goal was never to hurt her or protect the villains of the past. He explains that his own family has been haunted by the missing pieces of their history, and that he saw Scarlett's unfinished manuscript as the only way to finally find the truth. He argues that he didn't tell her because he wanted her to see him for who he is, not for the name he carries. Georgia is left in a state of emotional paralysis, unable to discern if Noah is a partner in her search for truth or the ultimate antagonist in her family story. The chapter concludes with a haunting parallel. In 1941, Scarlett and Jameson realize that they can never truly return to their old lives. They must remain dead to the world to stay alive. They make a pact to keep the secret, a pact that Scarlett would eventually weave into her fiction as a way to preserve it without exposing it. In the present, the chapter ends with Georgia standing in the study, surrounded by the ghosts of her ancestors and the man who has become her greatest confidant and her greatest threat. She looks at the manuscript and realizes that the ending her grandmother couldn't write wasn't about love. It was about the impossibility of ever truly being free from the past. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 12. In Chapter 12, the narrative shifts geographically and emotionally, taking the historical timeline to the Mediterranean, while the present-day plot reaches a critical point of decision regarding trust and betrayal. The atmosphere in both timelines is heavy with the sense of no turning back. In Colorado, the cozy warmth of the study has been replaced by a clinical cold tension as Georgia grapples with the revelation of Noah's family connection to the conspirators of the past. The chapter explores the theme of whether we are responsible for the sins of our ancestors, and if love can survive the weight of a monumental lie. The present-day sequence is defined by a raw, high-stakes confrontation between Georgia and Noah. Georgia is at her most vulnerable and, consequently, discovery of Noah's secret feels like the final proof that honesty is an illusion. Noah, however, refuses to back down or apologize for his lineage, which he had no control over. He argues that his choice to stay and help her uncover the truth, even a truth that incriminates his own family, is the ultimate proof of his loyalty to her. This leads to a grueling emotional dialogue, where they deconstruct the difference between privacy and deception. Georgia is forced to look at the evidence objectively. Noah has provided her with the tools to ruin his own family's reputation. By the end of the chapter, Georgia has to decide if she will let her fear of being hurt again stop her from finishing the work Scarlett started. The historical timeline in this chapter provides a vivid and dramatic shift in scenery. We move to 1942, where Scarlett and Jameson have managed to escape the grey, oppressive skies of London for the Mediterranean. However, this is far from a romantic getaway. They are operating under deep cover, and the heat and bright light of the region only make them feel more exposed. Jameson is working to track the final threads of the financial conspiracy that turned him into a target. The prose captures the shift in their relationship. They are now a seasoned team, moving with a synchronized efficiency born of shared trauma. Scarlett has become an expert in the art of the invisible woman, using her social grace to navigate dangerous waters, while Jameson handles the more physical and strategic elements of their mission. The emotional core of the historical section focuses on the illusion of safety. While sitting on a balcony overlooking the sea, Scarlett and Jameson have a moment where they try to imagine a future where they aren't looking over their shoulders. They realize that the Mediterranean, despite its beauty, is just another cage. This mirrors the present day, where Georgia realizes that her grandmother's house, which she thought was a sanctuary, was actually a place built on top of a massive hidden foundation of secrets. Both women realize that safety is not a location, but a state of mind achieved only when the truth is fully known. Scarlett's journal entries from this period show her beginning to draft the very first ideas for her romance novels, revealing that her writing was a way to process the terror of her real life by giving it the happy endings the world denied her. The chapter concludes with a pivotal discovery in both timelines. In the past, Jameson finds the smoking gun, a ledger or set of documents that proves the high-level corruption and names Noah's ancestor as a primary architect of the betrayal. In the present, Georgia finds the corresponding evidence hidden within a secret compartment of Scarlett's writing desk, which she only found because of a clue Noah provided. This moment of synchronized discovery acts as a bridge. Georgia realizes that Noah isn't trying to protect his family. He is trying to excise the rot from his own history. The chapter ends with a silent, powerful moment of reconciliation between Georgia and Noah. They don't need words to acknowledge that they are now inextricably linked by a truth that could change everything. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 13. In Chapter 13, the narrative begins to accelerate toward a collision point, where the secrets of the 1940s and the pressures of the present day can no longer be contained. The atmosphere is one of high-stakes preparation and heavy foreboding. Georgia and Noah have moved past their personal friction and are now operating as a unified front. But the weight of what they are about to reveal and what they are learning about the end of Scarlett and Jameson present-day sequence involves Georgia and Noah making the tactical decision to go public with the truth. This isn't just about finishing a book anymore. It is about restorative justice. They spend the chapter meticulously organizing the evidence, the dog tags, the hidden ledger, and the coded passages in the manuscript. George's mother continues to loom as the threat, representing the corporate and social power that wants the Stanton brand to remain a simple, pretty lie. However, the bond between Georgia and Noah has solidified into something steel-like. They have a quiet moment where they acknowledge that by releasing this story, they are essentially burning down the world as they knew it to build something more honest. It is a moment of profound intimacy that proves they have found the great love Scarlett wrote about, but in a much more grounded and resilient form. The historical timeline in this chapter takes us to late 1943, as the war moves toward its final, most brutal stages. Scarlett and Jameson are back in a position of extreme vulnerability. The smoking gun ledger they found in the Mediterranean has made them the most dangerous people in Europe to certain high-ranking officials. The prose captures the claustrophobia of being hunted by your own side. They are staying in a series of safe houses, and the strain is beginning to show on Jameson. He is a man who is built for duty, and the realization that his superiors are the true villains has shattered his sense of purpose. Scarlett, however, emerges as the anchor. She is the one who convinces him that their survival and the preservation of the truth is the ultimate act of patriotism. The emotional core of the chapter is the pre-climax reflection. In the past, Scarlett writes a journal entry that serves as the blueprint for the unfinished manuscript. She admits that she knows they might not survive, and if they don't, she wants the story to be told in a way that protects the innocent, but eventually indicts the guilty. She describes the concept of the things we leave unfinished, not as a failure, but as a baton passed to the future. In the present, Noah reads this entry aloud to Georgia, and it becomes the mission statement for their own lives. They realize that Scarlett was writing directly to her future descendants, hoping that one of them would have the courage to finish what she started. The chapter concludes with a moment of terrifying suspense in the historical timeline, as Scarlett and Jameson prepare for a final crossing that would bring them to safety and allow them to expose the conspiracy. They are intercepted. The chapter doesn't reveal who has found them, but the sense of dread is absolute. Back in the present, Georgia receives a final warning from her family's legal team, informing her that if she proceeds with the publication of the true version of the book, she will be sued into bankruptcy and stripped of her inheritance. The chapter ends with Georgia looking at the send button on her email, the ghost of her grandmother's courage prompting her to realize that some things are worth more than a fortune. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 14. In Chapter 14, the story reaches its emotional and narrative peak, delivering the long-awaited answers regarding the tragedy of the past, while the characters in the present deal with the explosion of the truth they have unleashed. The atmosphere is one of profound heartbreak and heavy consequences. This is the chapter where the unfinished nature of Scarlett's life is finally explained, and the cost of her secrets is laid bare. The historical timeline takes us to the winter of 1944, during the final, desperate months of the war. Scarlett and Jameson are in a remote location, hoping for an extraction that will finally take them reception hinted at in the previous chapter turns into a lethal confrontation. It is revealed that the men sent to stop them were not the enemy, but operatives from their own side, men working for the corrupt officials named in the ledger. In a harrowing and visceral sequence, Jameson realizes there is no way for both of them to escape. He makes the ultimate sacrifice, drawing the attacker's fire and creating a diversion so Scarlet can disappear into the night with the evidence and the truth. The prose captures the agony of their final goodbye, a moment of sharp, crystalline clarity where Jameson tells Scarlet that his life was a small price to pay for the love they shared. He dies believing he has protected her, leaving Scarlet alone in a world that has become a graveyard of her dreams. The present-day sequence deals with the immediate fallout of Georgia and Noah's decision to publish the truth. The story has gone viral, and the Stanton legend is being dismantled in the court of public opinion. Georgia's family is in a state of total collapse. The legal threats have turned into a full-scale public relations nightmare. However, the expected sense of triumph is missing for Georgia. Instead, she feels a deep, hollow grief for her grandmother. Reading the final raw accounts of Jameson's death makes her realize that Scarlet lived the rest of her life in a state of living death, writing romance novels as a way to stay connected to the man she lost. The wealth and fame Scarlet achieved were essentially blood money, the results of a career built on a sanitized version of a horrific reality. The emotional core of the chapter is the mirror of grief. Georgia realizes that her own cynicism was a pale shadow of what her grandmother must have felt. While Georgia was bitter over a divorce, Scarlet was carrying the weight of a murdered lover and a betrayed country for 70 years. This realization humbles Georgia and brings her closer to Noah. They share a scene of quiet, exhausted intimacy, where they acknowledge that while they have won by exposing the truth, they have also lost the comfort of their old illusions. Noah reveals that his family's reaction to the news has been one of shame and silence, further cementing his decision to break away from them and build a new life with Georgia. As the chapter concludes, a final piece of the puzzle falls into place in the present. Georgia finds the very last entry Scarlet wrote before she died. Not a letter to Jameson, but a letter to Georgia herself. In it, Scarlet explains that she left the manuscript unfinished because she knew she didn't have the strength to relive the ending, but she also knew that Georgia would eventually be the one to find the courage she lacked. The chapter ends with Georgia finally picking up her pen, not to edit Noah's work, but to write the final words of the book herself. She isn't just finishing a manuscript. She's finally letting her grandmother and herself move on from the things they left unfinished. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 15. In Chapter 15, the narrative shifts into a period of resolution and reconstruction. The dust from the explosive revelations and the public fallout has begun to settle, leaving Georgia and Noah to navigate the new normal they have created. The atmosphere is no longer one of frantic discovery or high-tension secrets. Instead, it is characterized by a quiet, steady resilience. This chapter explores the aftermath of truth, how it destroys old structures, but provides the only solid foundation upon which to build something lasting. The present-day sequence finds Georgia and Noah in a vastly different position than they were at the start of the book. The legal battles with Georgia's mother and the estate have reached a stalemate, while the family's reputation has been permanently altered, the public's response to the true story of Scarlett and Jameson has been one of overwhelming empathy and fascination. Georgia realizes that by revealing the gritty, tragic reality of her grandmother's life, she hasn't diminished Scarlett's legacy. She has made it human. The unfinished manuscript is finally completed, with the final chapters written by Georgia herself, serving as a bridge between the two women across time. The act of writing those final words is a cathartic experience for Georgia, allowing her to finally process the grief of her own past and the trauma of her grandmother's. A major theme of this chapter is the choice to stay. After the intensity of the project, there is a lingering question of what happens to Georgia and Noah now that the work is done. Throughout the chapter, we see them learning how to be a couple without a crisis to solve. They have moved past the initial sparks of chemistry and the adrenaline of the mystery, settling into a partnership based on genuine understanding. Noah proves that he isn't just interested in the story or the Stanton name. He is invested in Georgia. He helps her pack up the house in Colorado, a symbolic gesture of clearing out the ghosts of the past to make room for the future. They discuss their plans, acknowledging that while their lives will always be marked by the secrets they uncovered, they are no longer defined by them. The historical timeline in this final section is brief but poignant. It provides a final afterword for Scarlett. We see her in the years following the war, the period where she began her rise to fame as a novelist. This section explains how she navigated the transition from a woman in hiding to a global icon. It reveals that every happily ever after she wrote was a quiet tribute to Jameson, a way of keeping him alive in a world that refused to acknowledge his sacrifice. The prose captures the bittersweet nature of her success. She was a woman who had everything the world desired, yet she lived in a private world of memory. This final glimpse into the past validates George's decision to publish the truth. It feels as though Scarlett is finally being allowed to step out from behind the curtain of her own fiction. The emotional climax of the chapter occurs when Georgia and Noah visit a memorial, either a literal monument or a symbolic place of remembrance to Jameson. This scene mirrors the visit to the cemetery in Dear Martin, providing a sense of closure that the characters have been seeking since the beginning. Standing there together, they acknowledge that while they couldn't change the tragedy of 1944, they have ensured that Jameson's name and his true mission will never be forgotten. It is a moment of restorative peace, where the weight of the things left unfinished is finally lifted. The book concludes on a note of cautious, hard-earned hope. Georgia is no longer the broken woman who arrived in Colorado at the start of Chapter 1. She has reclaimed her voice, her history, and her capacity to love. As she and Noah leave the Stanton estate for the last time, the ending feels less like a happily ever after and more like a happily ever forward. The final lines of the narrative emphasize that life is messy and often unfair, but the stories we leave behind and the people who have the courage to finish them are what give the journey meaning. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 16. In Chapter 16, the present-day narrative focuses on the immediate, messy consequences of the truth being out in the open. Georgia and Noah are no longer just theorizing in a vacuum. They are dealing with the legal and social repercussions of challenging the Stanton legacy. The atmosphere in the Colorado house house is tense and claustrophobic. Georgia's mother has escalated her tactics, and the chapter details a grueling legal meeting or correspondence that threatens to strip Georgia of her rights to the estate. This pressure creates a new kind of friction between Georgia and Noah. While they are a team, the real-world cost of their mission is starting to weigh on Georgia. She begins to question if she is strong enough to handle a life where she is constantly at war with her own family. And Noah has to step up not just as a researcher, but as her emotional anchor. The historical timeline in this chapter takes us back to 1944, specifically the period immediately following Jameson's death/disappearance. We see a Scarlett who is completely unmoored. She is back in London, but she is a ghost of her former self. The prose vividly describes her performance of grief, as she has to mourn the official version of Jameson while keeping the agonizing truth of his real sacrifice locked away. This chapter introduces the beginning of Scarlett's life as a professional writer. We see her sitting at a small, cramped desk, fueled by a mix of caffeine and despair, pouring her trauma into the first pages of what will become her debut novel. Writing isn't a hobby for her. It's a survival mechanism. She realizes that if she can't tell the world what happened to Jameson, she can at least tell a story where a man like him gets to live. A significant portion of chapter 16 is dedicated to the cost of the secret. In the past, Scarlett is approached by a government official, likely one of the men involved in the conspiracy, who offers her a deal to keep her quiet in exchange for financial security and the protection of her family's name. This is the moment Scarlett realizes she is being bought. In the present, Georgia faces a mirrored situation. She is offered a settlement to stop the publication of the true history. The parallel between the two women is striking. Both are being told that the truth is a liability and that silence is a commodity. The dialogue between Noah and Georgia in this chapter is some of the most honest in the book. Georgia admits that she is terrified of ending up like Scarlett, wealthy, famous, but ultimately alone with a secret that eats her alive. Noah challenges this, pointing out that Georgia has something Scarlett didn't. A partner who knows the whole truth and isn't going anywhere. This reinforces their romantic bond, moving it from a mystery-solving partnership to a deep, committed relationship. They realize that to break the cycle of the Stanton family, they have to be willing to lose everything else. The chapter concludes with a discovery in Scarlett's old journal that changes the nature of the mystery. While Noah is looking for military secrets, he finds a personal entry from 1945 that mentions a pregnancy or a child. This revelation adds a massive new layer to the story. It means there is another person in the lineage who might still be alive, or whose identity was changed to protect the secret. The chapter ends with Georgia and Noah staring at the entry, realizing that the things left unfinished aren't just letters and ledgers, but a living person. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 17. In Chapter 17, the discovery of the mystery child from the previous chapter shifts the focus from a historical conspiracy to a deeply personal family quest. The atmosphere in the present day is charged with a new kind of adrenaline. For Georgia, this isn't just about her grandmother's secrets anymore. It's about the possibility of a living relative, an aunt or uncle she never knew existed. This chapter explores the theme of the erased life, focusing on how easily a person can be scrubbed from history when their existence threatens a powerful narrative. The present-day sequence follows Georgia and Noah as they become amateur genealogists. They move their operations from the study to the local records office and eventually start making phone calls to London. The tension between them and the estate and Georgia's mother is still high, but it takes a backseat to the excitement of the hunt. Noah's skills as a researcher are on full display here, but he is careful to let Georgia lead, recognizing that this is her family and her heart on the line. They find a birth certificate under an assumed name, confirming that Scarlett did indeed give birth in 1945, shortly after the war ended. The name on the certificate doesn't match anyone in the Stanton family tree, confirming that Scarlett went to extreme lengths to hide this child from the very people who were monitoring her. The historical timeline in Chapter 17 is a stark, emotional depiction of post-war London in 1945. The war is officially over, but for Scarlett, the struggle is just beginning. She is living in a city that is celebrating a victory while she is mourning a private defeat. The prose describes the physical difficulty of being a single mother in a society that is trying to return to traditional values. Scarlett is portrayed as being in a state of constant hypervigilance. She knows that the men who killed Jameson, or forced his disappearance, are still watching her, waiting for her to slip up. The deal she made for her silence provides her with a small flat and enough money to survive, but it feels like a golden cage. The emotional core of the chapter is the mother's conflict. In the past, we see Scarlett's heart-wrenching decision to give her child up for adoption. It wasn't an act of abandonment, but one of desperate protection. She realizes that as long as the child is with her, they are a target and a pawn for the people who want to control her. By giving the baby to a family with no ties to the Stantons or the military intelligence world, she gives the child a chance at a normal, safe life, something she can never have again. The scene where she hands over the infant is one of the most devastating in the book, written with a raw, visceral grief that makes Georgia weep in the present day as she reads the corresponding journal entries. Back in the present, the chapter explores the growing domestic bond between Georgia and Noah. Amidst the heavy research, they have moments of mundane intimacy, sharing meals, falling asleep over piles of papers, and navigating the small frictions of living together. These scenes serve as a counterpoint to the tragedy of the past. While Scarlett had to give up her family to keep them safe, Georgia is building a new kind of family with Noah, one based on the truth that Scarlett was denied. The chapter concludes with a breakthrough. Noah finds a lead on where the child, now an elderly adult, might be living. It turns out they didn't stay in England. The adoptive family moved to the United States decades ago. The realization that this person might be just a few states away sends a shockwave through Georgia. The chapter ends with Georgia staring at a phone number on a screen, her finger hovering over the dial button. She is terrified that reaching out will destroy this person's peace, but she feels an undeniable pull to bring the unfinished branches of her family tree back together. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 18. In Chapter 18, the narrative moves from the theoretical discovery of a lost relative to the daunting reality of making contact. The atmosphere is thick with first-move anxiety. Georgia is standing on the precipice of a decision that will not only change her life, but could potentially upend the life of a stranger who has no idea they are related to the legendary Scarlet Stanton. This chapter deeply explores the ethical dilemma of the right to know versus the right to privacy. The present-day sequence centers on the emotional preparation for the phone call. Georgia is paralyzed by what-ifs. She worries that this person, her great-aunt or great-uncle, might have had a perfectly happy life, and that her arrival, bearing secrets of wartime conspiracies and a famous lineage, will be an unwelcome burden. Noah plays a crucial role here, shifting from researcher to partner. He doesn't push her to make the call. Instead, he helps her draft what she will say, providing a stabilizing force. When Georgia finally dials the number, the scene is written with a high-tension, cinematic quality, the sound of the ringing phone echoing the heartbeat of the story. The call is answered by an elderly woman, and the chapter captures the awkward, stumbling introduction as Georgia tries to explain who she is, without sounding like a scammer or a madwoman. The historical timeline in Chapter 18 takes us to 1946 to 1947, the period of Scarlett's meteoric rise to fame. We see her navigating the publication of her first novel, The Things We Leave Unfinished, the book within the book. The prose describes the surreal experience of Scarlett sitting in lavish publishing offices in London, surrounded by men who have no idea she was once a fugitive and a spy. Her success is bittersweet. Every royalty check and every rave review feels like a reminder of the price she paid, Jameson's life and her child's future. This chapter reveals that Scarlett's pen name and her public persona were carefully constructed masks, designed to keep her enemies at bay, while she built a financial empire that would eventually protect her descendants. The emotional core of the chapter is the ghost of success. Scarlett is wealthy and famous, but she is profoundly alone. She attends parties and literary events, playing the role of the charming, mysterious widow, but her journals reveal a woman who is constantly searching the faces in the crowd for a sign of the life she gave up. She describes her writing as a haunting. The characters on the page are the only people she can be honest with. This mirrors Georgia's current situation. Even with the truth coming out and the world watching, she feels a sense of isolation that only Noah can penetrate. Back in the present, the phone conversation provides a shocking twist. The woman on the other end isn't surprised to hear from Miss Stanton. It is revealed that Scarlett, despite her promise of silence and the distance she kept, had found ways to watch the child from afar. The woman mentions receiving anonymous gifts and letters throughout her life, clues that she had never been able to piece together until now. This revelation shatters Georgia's perception of her grandmother as a woman who simply moved on. It shows that Scarlett's love was a persistent, quiet force that never truly let go. The chapter concludes with an agreement to meet in person. Georgia and Noah prepare to travel to meet this living link to the past. The sense of momentum is undeniable now. The unfinished story is finally being written in real time. The chapter ends with Georgia looking at a photo of a young Scarlett, realizing that for the first time, she isn't looking at a celebrity or a legend, but at a woman who did the best she could with the impossible choices she was given. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. Chapter 19. In Chapter 19, the narrative moves from the anxiety of discovery to the physical journey of confrontation and connection. The atmosphere is split between the nervous anticipation of a cross-country trip in the present and the cold, sharp-edged tension of a final reckoning in the past. This chapter serves as a bridge where the ghosts Georgia has been chasing finally start to take on human form. present-day sequence follows Georgia and Noah as they travel to meet Constance, the woman from the phone call. The travel scenes provide a much-needed break from the stifling atmosphere of the Stanton estate, allowing Georgia and Noah to breathe and reflect on their own relationship. Away from the legal documents and the prying eyes of the media, they find a deeper level of comfort with one another. However, the closer they get to their destination, the more Georgia's imposter syndrome flares up. She worries that bringing the Stanton name into Constance's life will be like introducing a virus, something famous and toxic that will destroy Constance's hard-won anonymity. Noah, ever the grounding force, reminds her that the truth is a gift, even if the wrapping is messy. He points out that Constance has spent a lifetime wondering about the anonymous thread in her life, and Georgia is the only one who can tie the knot. The historical timeline in Chapter 19 is one of the most intense and gritty sections of the book. We return to 1948, where Scarlett is at the height of her initial fame, but beneath the surface of her success, she is being blackmailed. One of the high-ranking officials involved in the 1941 betrayal, the man who is responsible for the mission that cost Jameson his life, confronts her. He believes Scarlett still has the physical evidence, the ledger, and threatens not just her, but hints that he knows about the child she hid away. This is the moment where Scarlett transforms from a victim of circumstances into a formidable adversary. The prose describes a clandestine meeting in a rain-slicked London alleyway that feels straight out of a noir film. Scarlett doesn't cower. She uses her newfound public platform as a shield. She makes it clear that if anything happens to her or her interests, a sealed envelope containing the truth will be sent to every major newspaper in the world. It is a bluff of legendary proportions, and it marks the birth of the Scarlett Stanton the world thought they knew, the woman who is always one step ahead. The emotional core of the chapter is the weight of the mask. In the past, Scarlett realizes that to keep her child and Jameson's memory safe, she must live a life of total artifice. She can never be truly Scarlett again. She is now a character of her own making. In the present, Georgia discusses this with Noah as they drive. She realizes that her grandmother's arrogance and detachment, which she felt as a child, were actually the symptoms of a woman who is constantly on guard. This changes Georgia's perspective on her own upbringing. She begins to forgive Scarlett for the distance between them, realizing it was a byproduct of the wall Scarlett had to build to survive the 1940s. The chapter concludes with Georgia and Noah arriving at a modest, sun-drenched house in a quiet neighborhood. The contrast between this simple home and the opulent Stanton estate is striking. As they walk up the path, the door opens, and Georgia is face to face with Constance. The chapter ends on a powerful visual. Constance has the exact same eyes as Scarlett. It is a moment of pure biological recognition that bypasses all the secrets and stories. The unfinished family tree has finally found its missing branch, and for a moment, the legal battles and historical conspiracies feel insignificant compared to the simple reality of two women standing on a porch, looking at their shared history in each other's faces. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 20. In Chapter 20, the story reaches a significant emotional plateau as the present-day investigation meets its most human element, and the 1940s timeline transitions into the long silence of Scarlett's middle years. The atmosphere is one of profound quietude, a contrast to the high-stakes drama of previous chapters, allowing the characters to process the magnitude of what they have uncovered. The present-day sequence takes place entirely within Constance's home. The meeting is initially tentative, but the tension melts away as Constance shares her side of the story. She reveals that while she never knew Scarlett was her biological mother, she was always aware of a benefactor who cleared her path through life, paying for her education and sending anonymous cryptic birthday cards that always featured a specific wildflower mentioned in the manuscript. The highlight of the chapter occurs when Constance presents Georgia with a hidden cache of letters she received over decades. These weren't just letters, they were fictionalized accounts of Scarlett's life, written as if they were stories, allowing Scarlett to tell her daughter the truth without technically breaking her vow of silence. Georgia and Noah realized that the unfinished manuscript was actually the key to decoding these letters. The historical timeline in Chapter 20 moves to 1950. The war is a fading memory for the public, but for Scarlett, the wounds are still fresh. This section depicts Scarlett's final, silent tribute to Jameson. She travels back to the site of their last moments in England, not as a grieving widow, but as a successful, untouchable woman of means. She uses her wealth to anonymously purchase the land where Jameson fell, ensuring it can never be developed or desecrated. The prose describes her standing in the windswept field, finally allowing herself to cry for the man the world forgot. This is the moment she decides to stop running and start building the Stanton Empire as a fortress to protect her secrets and her daughter's anonymity. The emotional core of the chapter is the language of symbols. Noah and Georgia spend the evening with Constance, cross-referencing the letters with the manuscript. They discover that Scarlett had embedded a secondary narrative within her published books, a secret history that only someone with the letters could decode. This transforms Noah's perspective on Scarlett as a writer. He realizes that she wasn't just a romancist, but a master of encryption. For Georgia, seeing her grandmother's love for a daughter she could never hold changes her entire understanding of her family's coldness. She realizes the coldness was actually a form of ironclad discipline intended to keep everyone safe. The chapter concludes with a moment of peace. For the first time since the book began, Georgia feels a sense of belonging that isn't tied to a brand or a bank account. She, Noah, and Constance share a meal, creating a bridge across 3 generations of secrets. However, the peace is interrupted when Noah receives a news alert on his phone. The estate's legal team has gone nuclear, filing an injunction that accuses Georgia of being mentally unfit to manage the archives. The chapter ends with the realization that while they have found the heart of the story, the battle for the official history is about to become a war. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. Chapter 21. In Chapter 21, the brief reprieve in the sun-drenched house with Constance ends abruptly. The atmosphere shifts from the warmth of a newfound family to the cold, sterile reality of a legal battlefield. This chapter focuses on the theme of the price of the truth, illustrating that uncovering a secret is only half the battle. Defending it against those who profit from the lie is the true test of character. The present-day sequence follows Georgia and Noah's hurried return to Colorado. The news of the mental incompetence filing by her mother's legal team has turned the local community and the literary world forced to run a gauntlet of reporters to enter her own home. Inside, the house feels like a fortress under siege. The chapter highlights Georgia's internal growth, whereas the Chapter 1 Georgia might have crumbled or fled. This version is fueled by the knowledge of Constance's existence and Scarlett's hidden sacrifice. She and Noah spend the night strategizing with their own counsel. Noah's loyalty is tested as his own family's lawyers reach out, offering him a way out of the scandal if he disavows George's findings. His refusal is absolute, cementing the romantic and moral bond between them. The historical timeline in Chapter 21 moves to the mid-1950s. Scarlett is now an established literary titan, but the chapter reveals the first crack in her armor. The first suspicion. A sharp-eyed journalist and former intelligence officer who served during the war begins to notice the uncanny technical accuracy of the spy craft in Scarlett's romance novels. He visits her under the guise of an interview, but the conversation is a deadly game of cat and mouse. He hints that he recognizes the style of the missions described in her fiction as being identical to a certain classified operation from 1941, Jameson's mission. The emotional core of the chapter is the art of the deflection. In the past, we see Scarlett expertly manipulate the journalist, using her frivolous romance writer persona as a weapon. She plays into his sexism, making him believe she is simply a woman with a vivid imagination and a few military consultants she met at parties. It's a masterclass in social engineering. However, her journals reveal the terror she felt during the encounter. In the present, Georgia uses a similar tactic. During a preliminary legal deposition, she stops trying to be the perfect granddaughter and leans into the messy, complicated truth, realizing that her vulnerability is her greatest strength against her mother's polished facade. The chapter concludes with a discovery in the 1950s timeline. After the journalist leaves, Scarlett realizes that she can no longer keep the physical evidence, the ledger and the dog tags, in any standard hiding place. She decides to integrate the clues to their location into the very manuscript she is currently writing, the one Georgia is now finishing. The chapter ends in the present, with Georgia and Noah looking at a specific passage in the book that they previously thought was just purple prose. They realize it's a set of GPS-style coordinates based on a landmark that existed in 1955. The final scene shows Georgia grabbing a coat and a flashlight. They aren't just looking for words anymore. They are going to dig up the physical proof that will end the legal war once and for all. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 22. In Chapter 22, the treasure hunt moves from the mental to the physical. The atmosphere is one of frantic, midnight urgency. The coordinates found in the previous chapter point to a neglected corner of the Stanton estate, a place Georgia hasn't visited since she was a child. This chapter focuses on the theme of buried truths, emphasizing that secrets, much like the physical objects that represent them, eventually demand to be brought to the surface. The present-day sequence follows Georgia and Noah as they trek out into the Colorado woods in the middle of a light snowfall. The landscape is eerie and silent, a stark contrast to the media firestorm happening back at the house. They are looking for an old stone foundation, the remains of a summer house that burned down in the late 1950s. The physical exertion of the search allows Georgia to vent her frustrations. As they dig through the frozen earth near the hearth of the ruined structure, the tension between them remains high, but it's now fueled by a shared its sense of destiny. When George's shovel finally hits something metallic, the sound rings out like a bell in the silent woods. They unearth a lead-lined box, a time capsule of sorts, hidden by Scarlett decades ago. The historical timeline in Chapter 22 takes us back to the late 1950s. Scarlett is at the peak of her fame, but her personal life is a vacuum. This section explores the emotional toll of isolation. Scarlett is wealthy, respected, and influential, yet she has no one she can truly talk to. Her journals from this period are shorter, more clipped, reflecting a woman who is tired of the performance. She watches her daughter, Constance, from afar, visiting the town where she lives but never making contact, and the pain of that distance is palpable. This chapter reveals that Scarlett actually intentionally burned down the summer house herself as a cleansing fire to hide the location of the box they just found in the present. It was a calculated move to ensure that only someone who understood her codes would ever find the contents. The emotional core of the chapter is the weight of the evidence. Back in the present, Georgia and Noah return to the house and open the box. Inside, they find more than just ledgers. They find a series of photographs of the men involved in the 1941 betrayal, including Noah's ancestor in compromising positions or with high-ranking German officials. This is the nuclear option Scarlett held over their heads for 50 years. It's the proof that the heroes of the war were often the ones profiteering from it. Georgia realizes that this box is her shield. It is the leverage she needs to stop her mother's lawsuit and the estate's attempts to silence her. The chapter concludes with a moment of heavy realization for Noah. Seeing the cold, hard proof of his family's villainy is different than just hearing about it. He feels a sense of inherited shame that threatens to drive a wedge between him and Georgia. However, Georgia uses the very words Scarlett wrote in the manuscript to comfort him. We are not the blood in our veins, but the choices in our hands. The chapter ends with them sitting on the floor of the study, surrounded by the physical debris of a 70-year-old conspiracy, finally possessing the power to end the story on their own terms. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. Chapter 23. In Chapter 23, the narrative moves from the search for evidence to the aggressive application of it. The atmosphere is one of clinical, cold-blooded confrontation. This chapter is the checkmate of the present-day timeline, where Georgia finally stops playing defense and takes control of the Stanton legacy. The present-day sequence centers on a high-stakes meeting at the Stanton estate. Georgia, backed by Noah and their legal counsel, calls for an emergency sit-down with her mother and the estate's lawyers. Instead of arguing about her mental state or the brand, Georgia simply slides the surveillance photographs and the 1941 ledgers across the table. The shift in power is instantaneous. Her mother's facade cracks as she realizes that the truth Georgia found doesn't just damage the family brand, it exposes a level of historical criminal activity that could lead to international scandal and the total seizure of their assets. Georgia offers a deal. She will finish and publish the book exactly as she sees fit, and the lawsuit against her will be dropped immediately, or she will turn the entire box over to the press. For the first time, Georgia sees her mother not as a monster, but as a terrified woman who has spent her life protecting a lie she didn't even fully understand. The historical timeline in Chapter 23 takes us to 1958, revealing one of the most heartbreaking moments in Scarlett's life, the final meeting. Scarlett travels to the United States under a pseudonym to meet with Constance's adoptive parents. This isn't a meeting to reclaim her child, but to ensure that the shield she has built is holding. The prose describes Scarlett watching a young Constance from a distance, playing in a park. She meets with the parents in a quiet diner, handing them a final massive sum of money and a set of instructions for emergencies. This scene highlights Scarlett's total self-sacrifice. She purposefully remains a stranger to her own daughter to ensure that the corruption of the Stanton name never touches Constance's life. The emotional core of the chapter is the burden of the matriarch. Both women, across time, are making choices to protect their families, but their methods are opposites. Scarlett protected through distance and silence. Georgia is protecting through exposure and proximity. Georgia realizes that by standing up to her mother, she's actually breaking a cycle of fear that has plagued 3 generations of Stanton women. Noah watches this transformation with a mix of awe and relief, realizing that Georgia has finally found the strength to be the lead character in her own life story. The chapter concludes with the departure of the legal team. The house is suddenly quiet, but it's a peaceful silence rather than a heavy one. However, the victory is bittersweet. Her mother leaves without a word of reconciliation, choosing the lie, even when the truth is staring her in the face. The chapter ends with Georgia and Noah standing on the porch, looking out over the estate. They've won the war, but the cost is the total destruction of Georgia's relationship with her mother. Georgia turns to Noah and asks, "What do we do now that there's nothing left to hide?" The final scene shows Noah picking up a pen and handing it to her, signaling that it's time to write the final chapters of the manuscript. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 24. In Chapter 24, the narrative enters a phase of the great unfolding. Now that the legal threats have been neutralized, the focus shifts to the grueling, meticulous work of actually bringing the truth to the world. The atmosphere in the present day is one of caffeinated exhaustion and creative fire, while the historical timeline enters the 1960s, a decade where the world began to change faster than Scarlett Stanton's carefully crafted secrets could keep up with. The present-day sequence follows Georgia and Noah as they enter the editorial cave. The chapter detailed the intense collaboration required to weave the historical truth, the ledgers and dog tags, into the fictionalized framework Scarlett left behind. This is the first time we see Georgia truly embrace her identity as a writer. She stops being just the archivist and starts being the author. The chapter explores the vulnerability of the creative process. Georgia and Noah have several heated debates about how much of the ugly truth to include. These arguments are no longer about distrust, but about the integrity of the story. Their relationship reaches a new level of stability here. They have become a well-oiled machine, fueled by a shared mission to do right by Scarlett and Jameson. The historical timeline in Chapter 24 moves into the early 1960s. Scarlett is now a global phenomenon, but she is beginning to feel the pressure of the changing of the guard. The new generation of the 60s, with its focus on transparency and rebellion against the old world secrets of the 1940s, makes Scarlett feel like a relic. The chapter depicts a specific incident at a high-profile literary gala, where a young, radical journalist publicly questions her about her mysterious activities during the war. We see Scarlett's internal panic as she realizes that the golden age of secret keeping is ending. The prose describes her retreat to her study, where she begins to realize that her novels, once her shield, might eventually become her confession. The emotional core of the chapter is the burden of being a symbol. In the past, Scarlett realizes she has become a type, the elegant, untouchable romance novelist, and it's a character she can no longer escape. She feels trapped by the very success that was supposed to free her. In the present, Georgia experiences a mirrored sensation. As news of the upcoming true book leaks to the press, Georgia becomes a symbol of the whistleblower granddaughter. She struggles with the public's desire to turn her into a hero, when she feels more like a woman who is simply tired of carrying her family's weight. Noah helps her navigate this by reminding her that they aren't writing for the public's approval, but for the one person who never got to tell her own story. The chapter concludes with a significant breakthrough in the manuscript. While working on the final chapters, Georgia finds a hidden author's note that Scarlett had tucked into the back of a later edition book. It's a series of dates and locations that don't match any of her book tours. Noah realizes these were the dates Scarlett secretly traveled to watch Constance graduate from high school and college. The realization that Scarlett lived her life as a ghost in her own family's world is the final piece of emotional data Georgia needs to finish the book. The chapter ends with Georgia typing the first words of the true ending. The silence of the house is finally filled with the sound of the truth being told, one keystroke at a time. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 25. In Chapter 25, the narrative shifts from the external battles of law and history to the internal battles of mortality and legacy. The atmosphere is one of sobering reality. In both timelines, the characters realize that time is the one enemy they cannot outmaneuver. The theme of this chapter is the finite nature of secrets, exploring what happens when the keeper of a secret realizes they won't be around to guard it forever. The present-day sequence deals with the logistical and emotional whirlwind of the official publication announcement. The true version of Scarlett's final book is slated for release, and the world is buzzing. Amidst this, Georgia and Noah experience a crash after the high of their investigation. The exhaustion finally hits them, leading to a moment of raw vulnerability. Georgia struggles with a new fear. Once the book is out, her connection to Scarlett and her purpose for being with Noah might dissipate. Noah, however, reaffirms that he isn't there for the book. He's there for the woman who is brave enough to finish it. They begin to discuss their life after, moving from being partners in a mystery to partners in a future. The historical timeline moves into the mid-1960s and presents a turning point for Scarlett. A health crisis. For the first time, the Iron Lady of literature is physically vulnerable. After a collapse in her London home, she is forced to confront her mortality. The prose depicts her in a hospital bed, stripped of her makeup, her expensive clothes, and her public persona. In this state of weakness, her mind drifts back to Jameson more than ever. This health scare acts as the catalyst for her to begin the unfinished manuscript in earnest. past. She realizes that she cannot take the truth to the grave, where Jameson's sacrifice will truly be erased. The emotional core of the chapter is the urgency of the pen. In the past, Scarlett begins writing with a feverish intensity she hasn't felt in years. She isn't writing for fans or money. She is writing for the girl, Constance, and the granddaughter, who she hopes will exist. In the present, Georgia feels a mirroring sense of urgency. As she prepares the final galleys for the publisher, she feels as though Scarlett is sitting in the room with her, urging her to get the details right. The connection between the two women across time is no longer just through paper. It feels spiritual. The chapter concludes with a poignant discovery. While going through Scarlett's medical records from the 60s, Noah finds a letter from a doctor that Scarlett never sent. In it, she confesses that her illness was partly the physical manifestation of 70 years of held breath. Back in the present, the chapter ends with the arrival of the first physical advance copy of the book. Georgia holds the object in her hands, a tangible piece of truth. She looks at the cover, which features a photo of the real dog tags, and realizes that the things left unfinished are finally complete. However, the final page of the chapter introduces a new complication. A mysterious figure from Constance's town has reached out, claiming to have a box that belongs to the Stanton family, one that Scarlett left in their care decades ago, only to be opened upon the publication of the truth. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 26. In Chapter 26, the story transitions into the 1970s in the past, while the present-day narrative takes a reflective turn toward the legacy of mothers and daughters. The atmosphere is one of anticipation and inherited duty, as Georgia and Noah realize that even though the book is printed, the personal impact of the truth is only just beginning to be felt by the living. The present-day sequence follows Georgia and Noah as they travel back to Constance's quiet neighborhood. The mysterious box mentioned in the previous chapter has arrived from a local attorney who served the family that adopted Constance. This box represents Scarlett's final failsafe. When they open it with Constance, they find it isn't filled with more scandals or ledgers, but with personal artifacts. A lock of Jameson's hair, a pressed wildflower from the field where they last met, and a series of tape recordings. Hearing Scarlett's actual voice, not the polished version from interviews, but the private, weary voice of a mother, breaks the final barrier for Constance. The three of them sit in silence, listening to Scarlett explain the why behind the abandonment, finally replacing Constance's lifelong why with a definitive, because I loved you more than my own life. The historical timeline moves into the mid-1970s. Scarlett is now a legendary recluse, similar to Greta Garbo or J.D. Salinger. This section explores her growing influence on the next generation. Despite her seclusion, Scarlett begins to receive letters from young women who see through the romance of her books and recognize the themes of female agency and hidden trauma. Scarlett realizes that while she couldn't tell her own story yet, she has spent decades teaching a generation of women how to read between the lines. The prose describes her sitting in her garden, surrounded by the fame she built as a fortress, finally beginning to feel that the world might be evolving into a place where a truth like hers could survive. The emotional core of the chapter is the sound of the truth. The use of the tape recordings in the present day serves as a powerful narrative device. realizes that the unfinished part of the story wasn't just the facts, it was the tone. You can hear the regret in Scarlett's voice, but also her fierce pride. For Georgia, this humanizes her grandmother in a way the written word never could. It allows her to let go of her lingering resentment for Scarlett's perfection. She realizes that Scarlett was never perfect. She was just incredibly well armored. The chapter concludes with a moment of unity between Georgia and Constance. Constance gives Georgia her blessing to include the story of her birth in the final promotional materials for the book. She decides she no longer wants to be a secret. She wants to be a Stanton. This is a massive victory for Georgia, as it signifies the total mending of the family line. However, the chapter ends with a haunting note from the 1970s timeline. Scarlett is seen looking at a newspaper clipping about a ghost from the past, a man she thought was dead who has suddenly resurfaced in the public eye. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. Chapter 27. In Chapter 27, the story enters a phase of high-energy public exposure and private dread. The atmosphere is a jarring mix of the bright lights of modern fame and the long shadows of a past that refuses to stay buried. This chapter explores the theme of the persistence of the enemy, proving that even after decades, the consequences of a betrayal never truly expire. The present-day sequence follows Georgia and Noah as they embark on the official book tour. The response is astronomical. The book is no longer just a literary release, but a cultural phenomenon. However, the chapter focuses on the internal strain this puts on their relationship. For the first time, Georgia is the one in the spotlight, and Noah is the one standing in the wings. This role reversal tests their dynamic. Georgia struggles with performance anxiety, feeling like she is once again becoming a brand rather than a person. She begins to receive anonymous, cryptic messages at her book signings, messages that suggest someone out there is not happy that the 1941 conspiracy has been brought back into the light. The historical timeline moves into the mid-1980s. Scarlett is an elderly woman now, but her mind is as sharp as ever. This section depicts her face to face with a ghost. The newspaper clipping from the previous chapter leads to a secret meeting in a London park. Scarlett meets a man who is a low-level clerk in the 1941 intelligence office, the only other person who survived the purge of Jameson's unit. The prose describes the chilling reality of two old people sitting on a bench, discussing a dead man's honor while the modern world rushes past them. He reveals a horrifying truth. The mole who betrayed Jameson didn't just do it for money. They did it to protect an even larger secret involving the true origin of the Stanton family fortune. The emotional core of the chapter is the burden of the legacy. In the past, Scarlett realizes that her entire life's work, the empire she built, was partially funded by the very people who destroyed Jameson as a way to keep her quiet. This revelation shatters her. In the present, Georgia discovers a similar taint in the estate's archives. She realizes that the legal settlement her mother was so desperate to protect was actually a continuous stream of hush money disguised as royalties. Georgia has to confront the fact that she has been living off the proceeds of her grandmother's island. The chapter concludes with a moment of intense danger. During a high-profile interview in New York, a fan approaches Georgia with a gift that turns out to be a warning. A replica of Jameson's dog tags, study tossed. Someone was looking for the original ledger. The chapter ends with a parallel realization for both women. The villains of the story aren't just names in a book. They are a living, breathing entity that is still protecting its interests. The final scene shows Noah stepping in front of Georgia as they leave the studio, his protective instincts kicking in. They realize the door is no longer a celebration, it's a target. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 28. In Chapter 28, the cloak and dagger elements of the 1940s bleed directly into the present day. The atmosphere shifts from a literary tour to a high-stakes thriller, exploring the theme of the long reach of evil. It becomes clear that some secrets are so corrosive that they maintain their toxicity for generations. The present-day sequence takes a terrifying turn. Following the warning at the TV studio, Georgia and Noah realize they are being followed. The chapter features a high-speed pursuit through the streets of New York as they try to lose a blacked-out SUV. This isn't just about corporate lawyers anymore. It's about the descendants of the original 1941 conspirators, who still hold positions of immense power. Noah's driving skills and military-grade nerves are put to the test, and the scene is written with a visceral, heart-pounding intensity. They eventually find refuge in a safe house, a small, nondescript apartment owned by one of Noah's old contacts. This shared danger breaks down the final barriers between them. The adrenaline leads to a moment of fierce, desperate intimacy, where they realize they are truly all in for each other. The historical timeline moves into the late 1980s, revealing the mystery that Scarlett took him to her grave. The identity of the final mole. In a flashback within the 80s timeline, Scarlett finally pieces together the last bit of evidence. It is revealed that the person who gave the coordinates to the Germans in 1941 was not a high-ranking official, but a trusted friend within their inner circle. Someone Scarlett had actually helped support after the war. This betrayal of friendship is what truly broke Scarlett's spirit. The prose describes her sitting in her dark library, holding a glass of scotch, looking at a photograph of the traitor. She realizes that the enemy wasn't just a system, it was a person she loved. The emotional core of the chapter is the mirror of betrayal. In the present, Noah receives a call from his father. It's a moment of reckoning. His father admits that their family's wealth was indeed built on the cleanup of the 1941 scandal. He begs Noah to stop, not out of malice, but out of fear for Noah's life. This creates a devastating conflict for Noah. To save Georgia and finish the book, he must effectively destroy his own father's world. Georgia watches him struggle with this weight, realizing that Noah is making the same kind of impossible sacrifice that Jameson made decades ago. The chapter concludes with a tactical decision. Georgia and Noah realize they can't just hide. They have to finish the manuscript in a way that makes it a dead man's switch. They decide to upload the raw evidence, the photographs, the ledgers, and the recorded tapes, to an encrypted server that will release the data to every major news outlet if they don't check in every 24 hours. The final scene shows them sitting in the dark apartment, the blue light of a laptop illuminating their faces. They have become the modern-day versions of Scarlett and Jameson, two people against the world, armed only with the truth. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. Chapter 29. In Chapter 29, the tension of the chase transitions into is one of calculated finality. As the story moves into the 1990s, we see the elderly Scarlett Stanton preparing for the end of her life, while Georgia and Noah prepare for the end of their silence. This chapter explores the theme of the final will, focusing on how we choose to be remembered when we no longer have the breath to defend ourselves. The present-day sequence finds Georgia and Noah still in their Brooklyn CFIs. Instead of running, they decide to use Georgia's massive public platform to their advantage. They arrange for a live, unedited broadcast interview with a top-tier investigative journalist. This is their insurance policy. If they can speak the truth to millions of people at once, the threat of being silenced becomes moot. The chapter details the intense preparation for this interview. Georgia is no longer the nervous divorcee from chapter 1. She is a woman who has found her spine. Noah, meanwhile, deals with the fallout of his family's betrayal, choosing to stay by Georgia's side even as his inheritance and reputation crumble. The historical timeline moves into the mid-1990s. Scarlett is now nearing the end of her life. This section depicts her final preparations. She knows she won't live to see the right time for the truth, so she begins the process of hiding the clues for Georgia. We see her meticulously editing the unfinished manuscript, inserting the codes and references that Georgia and Noah solved in earlier chapters. The prose is deeply emotional, showing a frail Scarlett moving through the Stanton house, touching the furniture and books, treating the estate like a giant puzzle she is setting for her granddaughter. This is where she writes the letter to the future that Georgia found in the study. The emotional core of the chapter is the handoff. In the past, Scarlett has a moment of profound doubt. She wonders if she is giving Georgia a gift or a curse. She realizes that by leaving this trail, she is potentially putting Georgia in the same danger she faced. In the present, Georgia has the same realization. She tells Noah that she feels like she's been drafted into a war she never signed up for. Their conversation is a beautiful, tragic exploration of inherited trauma. They realize that they are the cleanup crew for a mess made 50 years ago, and that their love is the only thing making the work bearable. The chapter concludes with the start of the live broadcast. As the red on-air light flickers on, Georgia looks directly into the camera. At the same time, in the 1990s timeline, Scarlett is shown sealing the final manuscript in its secret compartment. The chapter ends with a powerful parallel. The story is finally leaving the hands of the author and entering the world. The final scene shows George's mother watching the broadcast from the Stanton estate, her face a mask of defeat as Georgia utters the first words of the true story. My grandmother wasn't just a writer of romances. She was a keeper of casualties. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. Chapter 30. In Chapter 30, the narrative reaches its absolute peak of public and private revelation. This is the glass house chapter, where the walls Scarlett Stanton built around her life finally shatter, and the light that floods in is both blinding and healing. The atmosphere is electric, shifting between the cold, sterile glow of a television studio and the hushed, lavender-scented rooms of Scarlett's final days. The present-day sequence covers the live broadcast, and it is a masterclass in tension. As Georgia speaks, she doesn't just talk about the romance or the war. She drops the final shocking secret. The mole who betrayed Jameson was actually a member of the British Royal Circle who had been compromised by the Nazis. By revealing this, Georgia isn't just taking on her family. She is taking on a historical narrative that has been protected by the highest powers for 80 years. The chapter describes the world's reaction in real time, the explosion of social media, the frantic denials from the estate, and the visible relief on Georgia's face as the secret finally leaves her body. Noah stands just off camera, his presence giving her the strength to finish the sentences she's been rehearsing in her head for months. The historical timeline moves into the late 1990s, depicting Scarlett's final days. She is bedridden but resolute. The prose here is soft and rhythmic, capturing the fading pulse of a legend. This section reveals that Scarlett's last act of writing wasn't a book, but a series of legal instructions that would ensure Georgia, and only Georgia, would have the authority to do exactly what she is doing in the present. We see a final visit from a young, cold version of Georgia's mother, creating a tragic contrast. While the mother is looking for bank account numbers, Scarlett is looking past her, waiting for the granddaughter she knows will eventually have the courage to understand the unfinished parts of her soul. The emotional core of the chapter is the moment of transmutation. In the studio, Georgia explains that Scarlett wrote romances not to hide from the truth, but to survive it. She argues that every happy ending Scarlett penned was a prayer for a world that didn't exist for her. This recontextualizes the entire Stanton library. In the past, Scarlett dies peacefully, her last word being a whispered name, Jameson. It is the first time in 50 years she has spoken his name aloud without fear. The chapter concludes with the end of the interview. The on-air light goes out, and the silence in the studio is deafening. Georgia is shaking, and Noah finally crosses the floor to catch her. They realize that they are now the most famous, and perhaps most hated people in the literary world. But for the first time, Georgia is not afraid. The chapter ends with a scene in the past. The Stanton house being closed up after Scarlett's death. The secret manuscript tucked away like a ticking time bomb, waiting for the right hands to find it. The final line of the chapter is a reflection from Georgia. The truth doesn't set you free, it just gives you the room to finally breathe. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. Chapter 31. In Chapter 31, the narrative enters the eye of the storm. The massive public revelation of the previous chapter has triggered a global reaction, but the story pulls back to show the intimate, devastating ripples within the Stanton family itself. The atmosphere is one of shattered illusions, focusing on the theme of the inheritance of lies. The present-day sequence deals with the immediate fallout of the broadcast. Georgia and Noah are forced into hiding as the media and government agencies scramble to respond to the allegations of wartime betrayal and royal involvement. The chapter focuses on the psychological toll of winning. Georgia feels a strange sense of mourning, not for the secrets, but for the family she thought she had. She receives a final, scathing voicemail from her mother, who is being hounded by the press. The voicemail is a pivotal moment. It's the last string of the old Georgia being cut. Noah provides the necessary groundedness, helping her see that her mother's anger is actually a symptom of a life spent being a curator of a museum of lies. The historical timeline moves into the early 2000s, shortly after Scarlett's death. We see George's mother taking over the estate. This section is crucial for understanding the antagonist's motivations. It reveals that the mother did find hints of the truth back that she lacked Scarlett's brilliance and Jameson's courage. Instead of investigating, she chose to bury the evidence even deeper, believing that the Stanton brand was the only thing giving her value. The prose describes her frantic efforts to scrub the archives, unaware that Scarlett had already outsmarted her by hiding the true manuscript where only Georgia would look. The emotional core of the chapter is the ghost of the choice. In the past, we see a young Georgia, barely a teenager, moving through the house after the funeral, feeling the heaviness of the air. The chapter highlights a missed connection. The mother could have told Georgia the truth then, and they could have pieced it together. Instead, the mother chose the lie, setting the stage for their eventual war. In the present, Georgia realizes that her mother didn't just lose the estate. She lost her daughter a long time ago. The chapter concludes with a surprising development. A representative from a major historical society reaches out to Noah. They have found corroborating evidence in a recently declassified set of British files. Proof that Jameson's ghost mission was officially logged under a different name. This validates everything Georgia said on air. The chapter ends with Georgia looking at the first reviews of her completed book. They don't call it a romance, they call it a correction of history. The final scene shows Georgia and Noah leaving their safe house for a quiet, undisclosed location. They are no longer running from the truth. They are moving toward a life where they don't have to look over their shoulders. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 32. In Chapter 32, the story explores the theme of the invisible cage. As we approach the final stretch of the book, this chapter provides the crucial missing link that explains why Georgia was so broken at the start of the story. The atmosphere is heavy with the weight of expectation and the slow, suffocating nature of a life lived for others. The present-day sequence follows Georgia and Noah on the eve of the global launch. The book is officially hitting shelves in every major language. Instead of a glitzy party, they choose to spend the evening in a quiet rental cabin, away from the noise. This chapter focuses on the internal shift in power between them. Georgia is no longer the student and Noah the teacher. They are equals. They have a profound conversation about what it means to be the survivors of a story. Georgia expresses a fear that she has used Scarlett's tragedy to build her own success, but Noah reminds her that the truth is never an exploitation. It is an act of justice. Their relationship reaches its most grounded point here, shifting from the intensity of a mission to the steady rhythm of a long-term partnership. The historical timeline moves into the early 2000s, focusing on Georgia's early adulthood. We see her at 22, freshly graduated and eager to write her own stories. However, we see the systematic way her mother crushed her ambition, forcing her into the standard machine of PR and estate management. The prose describes the psychological grooming Georgia underwent. Her mother convinced her that she wasn't talented enough to be Scarlett, so she had to settle for being Scarlett's gatekeeper. This section reveals why Georgia's first marriage was so disastrous. It was another cage she stepped into because she didn't believe she deserved her own space. The emotional core of the chapter is the reclamation of the voice. In the past, we see Georgia secretly writing a short story and then burning it, out of fear of her mother's judgment. In the present, we see her standing in a bookstore at midnight, watching people buy the completed manuscript. The contrast is visceral. Georgia realizes that by finishing Scarlett's book, she has finally finished her own becoming. She is no longer afraid of the Stanton name because she has finally defined what it means for herself. The chapter concludes with a surprising gesture from Constance. She sends Georgia a photo of herself holding the book in a public library with a note that says, "I finally know who I am because you were brave enough, Dad." This validation from the lost member of the family is the final healing touch Georgia needs. The chapter ends with an ominous cliffhanger. Back at the Stanton estate, George's mother is seen looking at a set of files that weren't in the archive, files that belonged to Noah's father. It suggests that while the book is out, the war of the parents is not yet over, and a final betrayal might be lurking in the legal fine print. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 33. In Chapter 33, the story pivots from the public success of the book to the deeply personal war of the wills. The atmosphere is one of calculated ruthlessness, as the antagonists realize they can no longer suppress the truth and decide instead to destroy the messengers. This chapter explores the theme of the sins of the father, as Noah is forced to choose between his bloodline and his integrity. The present-day sequence centers on a devastating legal discovery. George's mother, in a final act of spite, reveals that Noah's father didn't just clean up the 1941 scandal. He actively sabotaged George's father's career years ago to keep the Stanton secrets buried. This revelation hits Noah like a physical blow. He realizes that his family's involvement in George's life wasn't a coincidence. It was a decades-long surveillance project. The tension between Georgia and Noah reaches a breaking point. For the first time, Georgia wonders if Noah's interest in her was ever genuine, or if he was just the final sentry sent to monitor her. The chapter details a heart-wrenching confrontation where Noah has to strip away every layer of his family's lies to prove his devotion to Georgia. The historical timeline takes a surprising turn, looking back at George's childhood in the late 1990s. We see a young Georgia spending time with an elderly, frail Scarlett. This section reveals Scarlett's secret influence. While George's mother was focused on the brand, Scarlett was whispering stories to Georgia, planting the seeds of curiosity that would eventually lead her to the manuscript. Scarlett knew Georgia was the only one with the Stanton fire in her eyes. The prose describes Scarlett giving a young Georgia a specific locket, one that Georgia still owns, which contains a microscopic hidden key. The emotional core of the chapter is the choice of loyalty. Noah makes a radical move to prove himself to Georgia. He goes to his father's office and physically retrieves the shadow files, the unofficial records of how the two families have been intertwined for 80 years. By doing this, he effectively exiles himself from his family and his career. In the present, he hands these files to Georgia, giving her the ammunition to silence her mother forever. It is a moment of total surrender. He gives Georgia the power to destroy his own legacy to ensure hers is safe. The chapter concludes with Georgia using the locket key for the first time. She realizes it fits a small, unassuming music box in Scarlett's old bedroom that everyone had assumed was broken. Inside, she finds one final letter. Not a story, not a confession, but a personal blessing. Scarlett writes that she knew the truth would be a burden, but she also knew that Georgia would find a partner, Jameson's equivalent to help her carry it. The chapter ends with Georgia and Noah standing in the ruins of their family's reputations, finally realizing that they are free to build something that isn't founded on a lie. The final scene shows Georgia's mother receiving a cease and desist that includes a copy of the Shadow Files. For the first time, the mother is truly silent. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. Chapter 34. In Chapter 34, the narrative begins to weave the final threads of the past and present into a single cohesive tapestry. The atmosphere is one of solemn resolution. After the high-octane legal battles of the previous chapters, the story slows down to address the moral debt owed to the victims of the 1941 conspiracy. The present-day sequence follows Georgia and Noah as they make a monumental decision regarding the Stanton estate. With the Shadow Files in their possession, they have the power to liquidate the family's assets, which were largely built on the hush money and wartime profiteering they uncovered. Instead of keeping the wealth, Georgia decides to transform the estate into a living archive and foundation. The chapter details their plan to turn the Colorado house into a research center for wartime history and a sanctuary for writers who tell difficult truths. This act of restorative justice effectively kills the Stanton brand as a corporate entity and replaces it with a legacy of transparency. It is the moment Georgia truly steps out of her grandmother's shadow and into her own light. The historical timeline returns to 1944, providing a final missing detail about Jameson's last mission. We see the moments right before he was compromised. This section reveals that Jameson knew he was being betrayed before he even took off. He had discovered a discrepancy in the flight coordinates but chose to fly anyway because he knew that if he didn't, the mole would simply target someone else, someone who might not be able to protect the secondary secret he was carrying. The prose is heroic and heartbreaking, showing Jameson's quiet dignity as he accepts his fate to protect the woman he loves and the truth he believes in. The emotional core of the chapter is the full circle. In the present, Georgia finds a final piece of evidence in the Shadow Files. A letter from Jameson that was intercepted by Noah's ancestor and never delivered to Scarlett. In the letter, Jameson tells Scarlett that he is finishing the story so she can live to tell hers. Reading this, Georgia realizes that her entire life and her meeting with Noah is the fulfillment of Jameson's final wish. The parallel between the two men is completed. Where Jameson sacrificed his life, Noah has sacrificed his inheritance and his family ties to ensure the same truth survives. The chapter concludes with a meeting between Georgia and her mother. It is not a scene of forgiveness, but of finality. Georgia offers her mother a modest stipend from the new foundation on the condition that she leaves the estate and never speaks for the Stanton name again. The mother, stripped of her power and her lies, finally looks small. As she leaves, Georgia feels a weight lift that she has carried since childhood. The final scene shows Georgia and Noah standing in the empty study, the sun setting over the Colorado mountains. They are surrounded by boxes, preparing to move the archives to the new foundation. The chapter ends with Noah picking up a camera and Georgia picking up her laptop. They aren't just archivists anymore. They are creators. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. Chapter 35. In Chapter 35, the narrative begins its final descent, moving from the chaos of revelation to the structured beauty of a new beginning. The theme of this chapter is the living memorial, focusing on how the dead are truly honored, not through statues or silence, but through the active pursuit of the values they held. The present-day sequence centers on the grand opening of the Stanton Jameson Foundation. It is a crisp, clear day in Colorado. The event is attended by historians, journalists, and, most importantly, Constance. The atmosphere is triumphant, yet somber. Georgia gives a keynote speech that doesn't focus on the scandal, but on the concept of the unfinished. She argues that history is a living thing that requires constant tending. During the tour of the new archives, Georgia unveils a permanent exhibit dedicated to the 1941 mission, finally placing Jameson's name alongside Scarlett's in the public record. The chapter highlights the final reconciliation between Georgia and the public. She is no longer the scandalous granddaughter, but the respected architect of a new historical standard. The historical timeline shifts to the winter of 1944, showing the immediate aftermath of Jameson's loss within his unit. This section is told through the eyes of his fellow pilots. It reveals that while the official record called it a pilot error, his men knew the truth. They held a silent, unofficial ceremony for him in a rain-soaked field in England. This scene serves as a powerful mirror to the Foundation's opening in the present. It shows that the truth was always kept alive in small, private ways until Georgia was ready to shout it to the world. We see the unit's commanding officer, the man who would later become a high-ranking official, secretly burning the compromised files, a scene that explains the origin of the gaps Georgia had to fill. The emotional core of the chapter is the passing of the torch. During the ceremony, Noah's father makes a surprise, low-key appearance. He doesn't ask for forgiveness, but he hands Noah a small leather-bound diary that belonged to the ancestor who started the cover-up. It is an olive branch, the final piece of the puzzle that explains the why from the other side. Noah and Georgia realize that even the villains of the story were often just frightened people caught in a machine larger than themselves. This allows them to move from a place of anger to a place of profound empathy. The chapter concludes with a private moment between Georgia and Constance in Scarlett's old garden. Constance reveals that she has started writing her own memoirs, inspired by Georgia's bravery. The Stanton fire has finally jumped the gap from grandmother to granddaughter, with Constance as the bridge. The chapter ends with Georgia and Noah walking back toward the house as the guests depart. The Museum of Lies has officially been replaced by a house of truth. The final scene shows a single wildflower, the same species Scarlett loved, blooming in the snow near the Foundation's new sign. It is a quiet, symbolic nod to the endurance of life and love against impossible odds. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 36. Chapter 36 acts as the first stage of the aftermath, focusing on the theme of legacy beyond the page. The atmosphere is one of quiet, reflective transition. The present-day sequence follows Georgia and Noah as they deal with the first month of the Foundation's operation. The initial media circus has died down, replaced by a steady stream of historians and students. This chapter focuses on Georgia's struggle to find her own identity, now that the mission of finishing the manuscript is over. She realizes she has spent years being defined by Scarlett's secrets, and then by the act of revealing them. Noah, sensing her drift, takes her on a trip back to the small town where Constance grew up. There, they walk walk through the ordinary streets that Scarlett once watched from a distance. This experience grinds Georgia, helping her see that the real story wasn't just the wartime conspiracy, but the quiet, resilient life Constance lived despite it. The historical timeline shifts to the late 1960s, specifically focusing on a moment when Scarlett almost broke her silence. She is at a literary retreat in the Swiss Alps, and for a brief weekend, she strikes up a friendship with a younger writer who reminds her of the woman she might have been without the war. This section explores the alternate life Scarlett dreamed of. She considers telling this woman the truth about Jameson, but ultimately pulls back, realizing the world isn't ready. This scene adds a layer of bittersweetness to the present-day events, as Georgia realizes she is the person Scarlett was waiting for, the one who could finally hear the truth without it being destroyed. The emotional core of the chapter is the concept of the ghostwriter. Georgia begins to write her first original novel, one that has nothing to do with her grandmother. However, she finds that Scarlett's influence is in the rhythm of her prose and the way she views the world. She realizes that we never truly start with a blank page. We're always writing on top of the stories that came before us. Noah, meanwhile, begins his own project, a biographical account of the pilots who were erased by the cover-up, ensuring that Jameson's unit is remembered as men, not just footnotes in a scandal. The chapter concludes with a surprising discovery in the archives. A student researcher finds a series of microfilms that Scarlett had mislabeled on purpose. When Georgia and Noah develop them, they see footage of the 1941 training camps, including a few seconds of Jameson laughing and looking directly into the camera. It is the first time Georgia has seen him move, and the first time Noah sees the man his family tried to erase. The chapter ends with the two of them watching the flickering silent film in the dark archive, a bridge across time that no legal document or book could ever replicate. The final scene shows Georgia opening a new document on her laptop. The title isn't about the past, it's about the future. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 37. In Chapter 37, the focus shifts toward the final legal and emotional accounting of the past. The atmosphere is heavy, with the sense of a closing circle, exploring the theme of the inevitable collapse of constructed power. The present-day sequence deals with the formal legal conclusion for the Mason family. Noah's father faces a series of civil suits and a potential criminal investigation into the tampering of historical records and the misappropriation of funds linked to the hush money accounts. Georgia watches as the world she once feared, the world of lawyers, high-stakes boardrooms, and family leverage, systematically dismantles itself. Noah is called to give a final testimony that effectively severs his ties to the Mason fortune. This chapter highlights the cost of his integrity. While he has gained a life with Georgia, he has lost the comfort of his history. The scene where he walks off the courthouse, leaving his father behind, mirrors the moment Scarlett left the airfield in 1941. A clean break from a corrupted life. The historical timeline moves to the late 1970s, revealing a crucial and unsettling connection. We see a young, hungry lawyer beginning his career at the firm that would eventually represent the Stanton estate. This man is assigned to handle Scarlett's annoyance files, the letters from people asking too many questions about the war. The chapter shows his first meeting with George's mother, who is then a young woman eager to secure her inheritance. This section reveals that the conspiracy, wasn't just a wartime event. It was a living agreement made in the 70s between a lawyer who wanted power and a daughter who wanted security. They realized that keeping Scarlett's romance brand intact was more profitable than the truth. The emotional core of the chapter is the concept of the inherited burden. Georgia realizes that her mother didn't just stumble into the lie. She actively helped build the modern version of the cage. This revelation allows Georgia to stop trying to save her mother and instead accept that they were always on opposite sides of a moral line. Noah and Georgia spend the evening at the foundation, looking over the newest acquisitions. They find a series of letters from other forgotten families of the 1941 mission who are finally coming forward. Georgia realizes her book was the key that unlocked hundreds of other stories. The chapter concludes with a moment of quiet between Georgia and Noah. They receive news that the Stanton House in Colorado has been officially designated as a historical landmark, protected from any future attempts by her mother to reclaim or sell it. The chapter ends with Georgia looking at a photograph of herself as a child with Scarlett, realizing that even in the 70s, while the lawyers were plotting, Scarlett was already planning for Georgia to be the one to break their work. The final scene shows the 1970s lawyer, now an old man in the present day, signing a non-disclosure waiver as part of his disbarment, his power finally extinguished by the very papers he used to control others. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 38. In Chapter 38, the story moves toward a sense of ultimate closure, shifting from the cold rooms of legal battles to the windswept fields where the secrets first began. The atmosphere is one of pilgrimage, exploring the theme of returning home, not to a place, but to the truth. The present-day sequence follows Georgia and Noah as they travel to England. Their destination is the specific coordinate in the countryside where Jameson's plane went down in 1941. This trip is no longer about research or evidence. It is about being a dad. Georgia brings a copy of the published book and the original dog tags they found in the hearth. The chapter describes their hike through the marshy, quiet landscape, which has remained largely unchanged for 80 years. When they find the exact spot, the physical reality of the tragedy finally hits Georgia. It is no longer a story in a manuscript. It is the place where a man gave up everything. Together, they perform a private ceremony, finally laying the ghosts of the past to rest in the soil where they fell. The historical timeline moves to the mid-1980s, detailing the final conversation between Scarlett and her longtime lawyer. Scarlett, sensing her own age, realizes that the lawyer has become more of a jailer than an ally. This section is a masterclass in psychological warfare. Scarlett reveals that she has known for years about his side deals with George's mother. She doesn't fire him. Instead, she tells him that she has already hidden the poison pill, the unfinished manuscript, where he will never find it. The prose depicts Scarlett's sharp, cold triumph as she watches the man realize he has been outplayed by a woman he underestimated for decades. This scene provides the backstory for why the lawyer was so desperate to stop Georgia in the early chapters. The emotional core of the chapter is the concept of the final edit. While in England, Georgia meets a descendant of the family that owned the land during the war. This mysterious person gives Georgia a small piece of rusted metal, a fragment of the cockpit that had been kept in a barn for generations. Holding the metal, Georgia realizes that while the Stanton name was built on fiction, the foundation of her life is built on this tangible, heavy reality. She and Noah spend their final night in a local inn, talking about the final chapter of their own lives. They realize they don't want to live in the shadow of the Stanton estate anymore. They decide to move to a small coastal town, away from the legacy, to start a life that belongs only to them. The chapter concludes with a moment of spiritual symmetry. In the 1980s, Scarlett sits by her fireplace and burns the very last of her safe journals, the ones that were meant to keep the lie alive. She chooses to leave only the truth behind. In the present, Georgia stands on a cliff overlooking the English Channel, the wind whipping her hair, and feels a profound sense of silence. The noise of the secrets has finally stopped. The final scene shows Georgia dropping a small wildflower into the water, a mirror to Scarlett's gestures throughout the book. The chapter ends with a sense of peace that is no longer fragile. The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros, Chapter 39. In Chapter 39, the narrative reaches its destination, shifting from the weight of history to the lightness of a life finally being lived in the open. The atmosphere is one of serene resolution, focusing on the theme of the enduring echo. The present-day sequence finds Georgia and Noah a year after the publication of the manuscript. They have settled into a quiet life on the coast, away from the intense scrutiny of the Stanton estate. Georgia is no longer writing to solve a mystery or satisfy a legacy. She's writing for the sheer joy of the craft. The chapter describes her sitting at a desk that overlooks the sea, working on a story that is entirely her own. Noah has transitioned into a role as a historical consultant, ensuring that stories like Jameson's are never erased again. Their relationship has evolved into a steady, supportive partnership that is no longer defined by the trauma they uncovered, but by the future they are building together. The historical timeline offers one final ethereal glimpse into the past. Instead of a specific year, this section functions as a bridge. It depicts the legacy of Scarlett's choice through the eyes of the readers who have bought the true book. We see a montage of people, a student in a library, an old woman in a nursing home, a young man on a train, all closing the book with a sense of profound connection. This section reveals that Scarlett's greatest work wasn't the romance novels or even the secret manuscript. It was the spark of courage she passed down through the decades. The prose reflects on the idea that while Jameson and Scarlett never had their life together, their love became a landmark that guided others toward the truth. The emotional core of the chapter is the final gathering. Georgia, Noah, and Constance meet one last time at the site of the foundation. They aren't there for a ceremony or a press event. They are there to plant a garden. They choose flowers that represent different parts of the story: resilience, memory, and hope. As they work in the soil together, the 3 generations of the Stanton lineage are finally in harmony. Constance shares a story about her adoptive parents that she had never told anyone before, proving that even the ordinary parts of her life were touched by the protection Scarlett provided. The chapter concludes with Georgia finding a small, forgotten note tucked into the back of Scarlett's personal copy of her first book. It is a single line, written in Scarlett's sharp, elegant one who finishes the race. Georgia realizes that this journey was never about the scandal or the money. It was a long-distance conversation between two women who refused to let the world dictate their worth. The final scene of the book shows Georgia and Noah walking along the beach at sunset. Georgia stops to look back at the footprints they've left in the sand, noting how they are eventually washed away by the tide, just like the names of the people in the war. But she realizes that it doesn't matter if the names are forgotten, as long as the truth remains in the water. She takes Noah's hand, and they walk toward their home, leaving the shadows of the past behind them for good. The story ends not with a period, but with the sense of a page being turned.